Everyone wants to eliminate their fear of failure. Did you know that almost 9 out of 10 people abandon their dreams because of just one fear? But here's what's crazy. Most people are dealing with their fear of failure completely wrong, because it isn't just about positive thinking or taking more risks. There's a psychological framework that rewires your entire relationship with failure. Psychologists call it failure avoidance, when you deliberately dodge situations that might end up with you not succeeding. You know, when you procrastinate on that important project or obsess over making everything perfect. That's your fear of failure in action. Look, I get it. I used to be terrified of failing. My whole identity was wrapped up in being successful, so anything less felt like a personal attack. But what if I told you that changing your relationship with failure could be the key that unlocks everything else in your life? That's exactly what I want to share with you today. So how can you transform your fear of failure from a roadblock to rocket fuel? I've got a 5-step framework that changed my life, and I know it can change yours too. And this first step, it completely flips the idea of failure on its head. Okay, first things first, we need to completely redefine what failure actually means. Most of us grew up thinking failure is a terrible and permanent thing, but here's what research shows. Psychologists like Carol Dweck at Stanford has found that people with a growth mindset see failure completely different than those with a fixed mindset. They don't see failure as a reflection of their own worth, rather they see it as valuable feedback. Think about it like this. When you're playing a video game and your character dies, do you throw the controller down and say, "I'm a terrible person who's never going to amount to anything"? No, you say, "Oh, I see where I went wrong. I'm going to try a different approach next time." I used to treat every mistake like it was the end of the world. But when I shifted my thinking to this isn't a failure, it's just data, everything changed. I learned from the data, I made adjustments, and I moved on. And listen to this. Science has proven that when you reframe failure as feedback, you activate different neural pathways in your brain. What this means is you associate failure as learning rather than a threat. And this gives you a huge advantage in overcoming your fear of failure. But even with this mindset shift, there's still something that holds most people back. And this next step, it's even more valuable than the first one. Here's the secret that successful people know that changes everything about how they view their failures. They know that failure is actually normal, and not just normal, it's universal. Did you know James Dyson created 5,126 failed prototypes before he made a vacuum that worked? Or that Stephen King's first novel was rejected 30 times? Oprah was fired from her first TV job because she was unfit for television. And Michael Jordan, he was cut from his high school basketball team. The research on this is mind-blowing. A study from Harvard Business School found that entrepreneurs who had previously failed were more likely to succeed in their next venture than first-time entrepreneurs. Failure literally trains you for success. Remember this, all of us have failure stories. The key is owning your story. Instead of hiding your failures, start collecting them as badges of honor. This actually makes you more relatable, not less. Perfect people are intimidating. Real people connect. But here's how most people get stuck. Because knowing that failure is normal, it doesn't make the pain go away. But what if there was a method to handle that emotional sting without letting it throw you off track? This is where emotional resilience comes in. Psychologist Dr. Angela Duckworth, who studies grit and resilience, and by the way has wrote a fantastic book on the subject, says that suppressing negative emotions after failure actually makes things worse. The healthier approach is to acknowledge those feelings and process them. So what does this look like in real life? Emotional resilience means that when you face a setback, whether it's getting rejected for a job, bombing a presentation, or even just getting negative feedback, you don't pretend everything is fine. Instead, you actually acknowledge those feelings. Maybe you acknowledge those feelings by journaling about your disappointment. You talk it through with a friend, or take a walk to clear your head. What you're doing is you're actually giving yourself permission to feel that initial disappointment or frustration. But here's the crucial part. Just by performing one or two of these small acts, you greatly increase your chances that you won't get emotionally stuck. Research shows that action is the fastest way to rebuild confidence after failure. You don't wait until you feel better to take action. Taking action is what makes you feel better. Give yourself 1 or 2 days to process those feelings and then get back at it. Start revising that resume. Practice your presentation skills, or make adjustments based on feedback that you received. Each small step forward is going to help you rebuild your confidence bit by bit, even while that initial disappointment is still fresh in your mind. And talking about small steps, did you know that you can turn failure into bite-sized pieces that are actually enjoyable? There's a little psychological shortcut that turns the stress of bouncing back into managing stepping stones. and each one, it makes you stronger than before. When you're paralyzed by fear of failure, the worst thing you can do is to set huge, intimidating goals. That's like trying to run a marathon when you've never jogged around the block. Instead, break goals down into tiny steps. This creates what we call a success spiral. Essentially, each small win releases dopamine in your brain, which builds confidence for that next challenge. This approach can be a game changer. Take someone who wants to start cold emailing potential clients, but is terrified by that rejection. So instead of setting an overwhelming goal like get 10 new clients, they set a goal to simply write one email draft, and then send one email, and then send 5 emails in 1 week. Each micro success builds that resilience muscle. Eventually, rejection emails barely register to them because they built up an immunity through those small wins. And the magic of this technique is you can apply this to almost any situation that you're in. Tracking progress on small, meaningful tasks, it's one of the strongest motivators for long-term success. The key is to focus on the process, not just the outcome. What this means is that you celebrate showing up, putting in the effort, and making progress, not just the end result. Now, you may have noticed repetition is a driving force behind each of these techniques, and there's a powerful reason for that. What I'm about to share next is possibly the most powerful technique of all, and the one thing that separates those who eventually succeed from those who stay stuck in fear forever: systematic exposure. Psychologists have been using exposure therapy for decades to help people overcome phobias. The principle is simple but very profound. The more you expose yourself to what you fear, the less power it has over you. I call this fail small and fail often. Instead of avoiding situations where you might fail, deliberately seek out those small, manageable doses. I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. When I was terrified of public speaking, I didn't start by giving a TED Talk, but I did seek out every opportunity I could to get in front of those groups where I knew failure had minimal consequences. Church groups, small work group meetings, even virtual groups where I was a moderator. Was it uncomfortable at times? Yes. But here's the thing, I messed up constantly, but each time I survived, my fear shrank a little bit more, and it can work for you too. Research shows that people who regularly put themselves in challenging situations develop a psychological immune system that makes them significantly more resistant to failure. Think of your confidence as a muscle that you work out. The more repetitions you give it, the more your brain realizes, hey, fear isn't fatal. Please, don't make the same mistake I did and let fear of failure hold you hostage. Remember, you're not a failure because you fail. You're a fighter because you got back up. And the great news is, now you know how to turn that fear of failure into a key ingredient into your success. Which step resonated with you the most? I would love to know. Drop it in the comments below. And if this message spoke to you, share it with someone you care about, and I'll see you next time.